Welcome back to Blood Splatter Chatter. Zombie Fest. It is finally here. Tonight, me and the panel are talking about the one that began it all, George Romero's Night of the Living Dead. All right, again, thank you guys so much for being here. Let's introduce the panel from pop culture philosophers. It's Mr. Rockin Robbie Billups. What up, brother?
Station, man. So happy to be here to talk about one of the most important films in horror history.
I couldn't agree more. And if we're talking about one of the most important films in horror history, we got to have on Missing Lynk. What up, my brother? Thank you for being here.
What's going on, my brothers? Happy to be here with you and talk about this important piece of film history. I was going to say filmography, but that makes no sense. But yeah, happy to review this one. I've seen this. I was going to say I've seen this before more than once, but not in a few years. But it's always cool to revisit a movie and notice the influences that it's had or the impact it's had throughout film as a whole.
This is what I feel like I keep saying this to you and Fable and on the show, but it's like, exactly. That's like my sentiments exactly. Like I've grew up, I've seen this film once or twice in the past. Used to always see it on. If you're watching any horror movie ever, you see this on in the background. But it wasn't until I think it was a few years ago, I got the thing on 4K, fully fell in love with the film and just got exactly. I'm able now to see the impact that this has had on the history of horror. I love seeing the beginning of stuff. There's not many things like in film history where you can go back to and see like, oh, this is the first time that this has happened and it still be modern enough to be like fully enjoyable for me. Now, this isn't the first time a zombie was ever on screen, but the way that we look at zombies today, George Romero literally invented that in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. So speaking of George Romero, Robbie, when you and I did our top horror directors of all time, I think he was like your 5 or 4, and you gave me a solid 15, 20 minutes on why you love George Romero. If you could find a way to truncate that down just a little bit, who is he to you, and what do you think of him as a filmmaker?
George A. Romero is the spirit of the low-budget, independent horror filmmaker. He was one of the first true mavericks in the genre. Now, there were tons of people that like to do things and push buttons. I mean, we can go as far back as like Karl Freund and what he was doing with The Mummy. He was trying to be a little bit transgressive and subversive with that. You can get to some of the Italian films that were going on, Mario Bava. But George Romero is kind of like the encapsulation of that do-it-yourself, truly maverick and rogue filmmaker. George Romero hardly ever made a movie with any studio having any right to tell him anything that he could or couldn't do. He never compromised that vision. And even those times where he did, he had the name power of Stephen King behind him to still pump out something incredibly gnarly like Creepshow. This is the dude that they were coming after to do Resident Evil, but it was way too commercial for him, and they wouldn't let him do it his way. And I love and respect that about George A. Romero tremendously. He invented the subgenre of flesh-eating, living dead zombies, right? Like this didn't exist before this. The idea of the zombie was all like voodoo, Haitian zombies, right? Serpent in the rainbow type shit, right? Controlled people that are semi-dead, but controlled by somebody like a magician with power or somebody with a doll or something like that. This is truly dead people coming back to life and eating the flesh of the living. This is the first time it happened. And for 1968, this is rather gnarly. It's black and white because it's low budget. It's thrown together. This is a dude who made a bunch of commercials, and they were like, let's make a movie. Let's make a horror film. And he was inspired by the horror films that he was watching in the 50s with the re-release of Dracula and Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein and probably The Mummy and The Wolfman. But it's no holds barred, not going to compromise my vision, show it gnarly, show the truth, and throw in some social commentary that's relevant to the day and beyond, because all of his movies have a message very particular for its time, but they also still resonate today. That's who George A. Romero is.
Hell yeah, man. Very well said, dude. He's a guy, like even when we did the top horror directors episode, that was my first episode on Blood Splatter Chatter. It was like maybe 7-8 months ago. And I feel like in that, I was like, I've always respected him, but I've never loved any of his movies really, other than Night of the Living Dead. Since then, January is Zombie Fest month here on the channel, but December has been Zombie Fest at my house. And I've rewatched all the Romero films up through Land. Everything I said about Dawn earlier before, I was like, it's a 4 out of 5. No, it's a 5 out of 5. I was just not ready for it. It's not just him, but it's the zombie subgenre itself. If you would have asked me back in the early 2000s, like, do you like zombie movies? I probably would have been like, no, not really. There's none that I like. Even when 28 Days Later, I didn't see that till like 5-6 years ago. So like Shaun of the Dead and the Nazi zombies in Call of Duty, those were like the introduction to Nazis for me, because in the 90s, there was nothing. Like there's Brain Dead, Dead Alive, which is the shit, but that's not a film that people that aren't deep into horror films know about, especially back in the 90s before the internet.
When's the last time you can think, in fact, not the last time, the only time I can think of a filmmaker creating a classic monster. Vampires, werewolves, ghosts, goblins, witches, demons, they're all steeped in folklore history. Romero created this straight up.
And or literature history, where you get Frankenstein, Mary Shelley. And then the other thing that's interesting, when you bring up all those universal monsters, all of them are dead. Like we were just talking ahead of time about the undead phraseology. Like, could zombies be that? They kind of are, but vampires have already taken that because they're fucking dead. Frankenstein, dead. The Mummy, dead. And George Romero just took the idea of like, oh, let's just I don't know if he was thinking of it like this, but what he did was find a monster that is incredibly malleable. It's like the Batman of the horror genre. You can do anything with it. You can make a TV show out of it. You can make a movie. All of the best horror comedies or zombie movies. It's a super versatile genre or subgenre.
Well, he originally considered them ghouls.
Right.
They don't even use the term zombie until Dawn of the Dead, when it was kind of more popularized as zombies. He thought of them as ghouls, which according to the Oxford Dictionary is an evil spirit or phantom, that robs graves and feeds on dead people.
Right.
So, yeah.
And that's what the feeding on dead people is the main, like, okay, I guess that's why he thought that. But the public decided, no, these are zombies. What's interesting, I watched today, I only watched half of it. It wasn't the most enjoyable thing I ever seen. But White Zombie with Bela Lugosi, I was watching on Tubi. Yeah. It wasn't the best quality. What's funny is they used the term in that movie, The Living Dead. And then George Romero names his film Night of the Living Dead. And then he's surprised that people are calling them zombies. It's like, bro, you kind of set yourself up for that.
Yeah.
Of course.
Well, that wasn't the original name. The original name was Night of Anubis. Which
really?
I don't think this movie would have hit as well as it did at the drive-ins if it was called Night of Anubis, right?
Right. Before I go any further, let me just reiterate what Zombie Fest is. We're going to be talking about this subgenre all month. This week, obviously, we're doing the one that started it all. Next week, Robbie, you don't know this yet. I'm not going to hold you to it if you can't make the show, because it was driving me nuts that I didn't have a horror comedy in this month. So instead of just doing Lucio Fulci's Zombie, it's going to be Lucio Fulci's Zombie and Return of the Living Dead, and then following up with 28 Days Later, which was Steph's pick, which is the reason we're doing this whole month pretty much, and then ending it with a crazy Taiwanese zombie film called The Sadness that is fucking extreme in every way. But Steph, what is your opinions? Are you a fan of the subgenre of this subgenre?
Yes. I know it's cliche, but I zombies are probably my favorite horror genre. I mean, I'm branching out as I get older, but back in the early 2000s, like my entry to horror was, or what I was most appealed to, was zombies. I think what I've always liked about the idea of zombies, or what like a lot of movies kind of follow, or like a through line they follow, is like how easy social constructs or society breaks down or fragile it is, and how hierarchy roles easily switch up during these situations. There's a lot of psychology that goes with zombie movies sometimes, but they're just like foot soldiers. You can throw endless waves of them at people, and it's like,
right.
I like the fact that you can fight them off. They're almost the easiest to fight off as well, because there's a lot of times we've seen some of these classic zombie movies, even like The Walking Dead, and like, what the hell? You guys can't stop like these slow moving, like
right.
Put on some like leather and shit, some football pads, just burst through these bitches, but they're just there's so much, like you said earlier, they're very malleable. You can throw zombies in many different situations and get different outcomes with them, but it's always entertaining. And yeah, zombies are cool. I like zombies.
I would agree, man. Like I said, I think they have become my favorite subgenre. I'm a slasher fan, but they're never as interesting as the more interesting zombie movies. And one thing I hear a lot, like listening to podcasts, is, oh, there's so many of them. There's so many bad ones. They're easy to make. So all these, not very skilled filmmakers, they think, oh, what's an easy movie to make? I'll make a zombie movie. And it might like that might be true, but I must just be looking at good lists because I'm just picking like, oh, they say this is a banger, and there's like 15, 20 like just amazing zombie movies. There probably is a lot of bad stuff, but I don't know if I've ever seen a bad zombie movie because it's just not the ones that I'm watching. But where are you at on it, Robbie? What is your fandom level for the subgenre?
Just like Steph, Missing Link, back in the day, I was obsessed with zombie fiction. Like in the late 90s, early 2000s, that's when I was really coming to grips with Romero and his films. Was watching Dawn of the Dead. I'd seen Day of the Dead for the first time in the early 2000s. That still reigns as my favorite zombie film, my favorite Romero film, well, my second favorite Romero film. But I love Day of the Dead. And so I was obsessed with it when 28 Days Later came out, blew me away to finally see this, because it was a very cultish kind of subgenre throughout the 80s and the 90s, right? And to see it kind of hit with 28 Days Later and then the Zack Snyder Dawn of the Dead remake that was written by James Gunn, those two movies in conjunction started this whole thing. And it got so big that now, honestly, I'm tired of zombies.
Yeah.
I don't need any more zombie fiction in my life after I don't know how many years of mediocrity with The Walking Dead. Like, I don't need any more of that shit. I think we've said our piece. We can move on. And it's not my favorite.
Every time you
subgenre,
think that, there comes The Last of Us or something like that. You know what I mean? Like every time you think zombies are over, it's like, son of a bitch. What's the
see? Like I haven't even watched The Last of Us because I'm like, oh, that just sounds like another zombie fucking show to me.
Fair enough. Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? And like, I think 28 Days Later said something different, but aside from Romero and Danny Boyle, I don't think anybody else has said something unique with this. Now, granted, I haven't seen certain films like Train to Busan or whatever it is. I haven't seen that, and that's something that's on my list to watch coming up. So I don't want to discount the genre, but it was something I was so wholeheartedly into. And I guess it's like hipster of me, but now that everybody else is into it, I'm kind of like backing off.
Right. I will say, as far as Train to Busan goes, I think I've seen that movie twice. The first time I was like, oh, that's solid. The second time I loved it. And I think it's because going into it the first time, I was expecting, oh, they've reinvented the zombie subgenre. Like there's a reason why everyone's hyping this movie up. And it's not that. They didn't do anything different. They just executed a beautiful zombie movie. They just crushed what they did, but they didn't do anything overly original, which is why I was going to end ZOMBIEFEST with Train to Busan. I'm like, oh, that's the latest, the newest great zombie movie. But I'm looking at it, I'm like, I wanted to do something that does do something different. That's why I went with the sadness, where it's fucking extreme. It's like, I don't know if it's doing anything brilliant, but it's different.
You don't have to do something different, right? Like, and sometimes it's just like I mean, like one of the problems, like when zombie stuff started really taking off, was like you had the Resident Evil movies, right? That didn't understand it, right? The Resident Evil movies never understood zombie movies, except for part 3, Extinction. That one's good with the scene on the bus with the birds. Like that shit's awesome, right? But like all the other ones, they're kind of weak. And like zombie fiction just kind of became, and even like some people would argue 28 Days Later is not a zombie film. It's a zombie film.
Totally.
They're infected, like rage infected kind of thing, but it's a zombie film. It's the same tropes. It's the same ideas, the same commentary on society. That's one of the things that Steph said that I really, really love about this genre is, and this is spearheaded by George A. Romero, because every single one of his Of the Dead films is a very intentional commentary on society. And that's something that we can do very clearly with zombie and / post-apocalyptic type favor.
Right. And what's interesting, Romero definitely expands on what the thematic material that he lays out in Night of the Living Dead, but it's all right here. Like it's all just an extension of what happens in this movie, which is what makes it such an interesting franchise. You know what I mean? It doesn't get the respect that a lot of franchises get. And I don't know if part of it is even it's how far apart they're spread. They're like a decade apart, most of these movies, and even the name change. Night of the Living Dead and Dawn of the Dead. It doesn't, I don't know if people necessarily, everybody connects those two things together, at least on the non, diehard horror fans.
Well, those of us do, but the basic deal with that was John Russo was the co-writer with Romero on here, and John Russo basically kind of went his own direction with the title Living Dead, because he was responsible for Return of the Living Dead and that franchise. So this is actually a movie that spawned 2 sequel franchises.
To kind of lay it out for people that haven't heard how this went down, when you said earlier, Robbie, that they changed the name of the movie, and originally it said the original title on the movie, they decided to change it to Night of the Living Dead. They sent it into the graphics people. When they put Night of the Living Dead on there, they didn't put the copyright on the opening of the movie. That's all it took. Everybody owns this movie. We all own Night of the Living Dead. It's public domain, but you can play it on TV for free. You can remix it. You can show it in your theaters for free, make your own edits of it. Do whatever you
remember
want.
That movie, Night of the Dawn of the Day of the Living of the, like, you remember that one? Yeah.
Exactly. But let's dive into the movie. The Graveyard.
They're coming to get you, Barbara.
What do you think of the opening act, Robbie? Pretty much everything we get in the graveyard, meeting Johnny and Barbara, the first zombie attack, her running off to the house, everything up until Ben arrives on the scene.
It's masterful, because what it's doing is it's setting us in reality. But because of the use of its music, all the music here is like music from like the Capitol Records, like it's just like their library of
audio
music that people can use, right? And the music was like 10 years old, right? So it kind of felt like old school monster movies, but the way it was shot was very documentarian style and very real and very grounded. And it's got some really good dialogue, like that conversation. They're already dealing with some of those themes when Barbara and her brother, is it Johnny, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Well, they're talking about religion. They're talking about respect. They're talking about family. These are themes that are being presented in this film just through simple dialogue. It's very engaging. The use of the sound design, the editing of that first act, everything up until Ben shows up, it really lures you in. And just like the character of Barbara, we are shocked at what's happening. And I can't even imagine what it's like in 1968 when you have no idea what a living dead zombie is. So it's a great introduction to it, and it's got great dialogue. It's paced pretty well, and it just leads you right up to the craziness. Like when it happens, there's no explanation. It just happens, and we're there for the ride.
Mom! No! No! Johnny! Help me!
The angles of the camera, like George Romero was on the camera for this entire movie. There's basically 2 things. It was either on a tripod or he was doing handheld. There's not a zoom shot in the movie. Yeah, just the style and the black and white. Like in 1968, it was pretty rare to have a black and white movie, but it was so low budget. But to me, that sells the whole thing. It's like it makes everything like creepier, and it makes it more I don't know. It's like it makes it more fantastical to see it in black and white, but it also makes it more real at the same time, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, I was watching this thing, I think on the Criterion set right here, right? And they were saying that like in 1968, most movies are in color, right? And so like what's in black and white is newsreel footage. So the way that this is shot, handheld, documentary style, like, and black and white, it gives that audience at that time a very real sense of what's going on.
Right. Hell yeah, dude. What about you, Steph? What do you think of the first act?
Like Robbie said, I mean, not to copy him too much, but it's masterful. For movie, I can be a little wary of going into movies from a certain time. Unfortunately, I'm trying to get over that, but in 1968, it's black and white. I'm thinking it's gonna, I think you pointed it out. I don't know if it's whether that's like the documentary style of it or the dialogue, but it feels like natural. Like, sometimes with dialogue, like from movies of that time, it feels very performance. I mean, there's some of that in this movie, but
I know exactly what you're talking about. There's a certain like cadence that they'll have that sounds a little bit TV-ish, and like
they're coming for you, Barbara.
Yes.
Look, there comes one of them right now.
Right, it has that, but it doesn't have it in like. It's more natural than that for sure.
Yeah, yeah. But and then specifically in this opening scene, it feel with Barbara and Johnny, just kind of the rapport, them joking around with each other. It doesn't seem it seems kind of a little bit of ahead of its time.
Mhm.
Um it's very I like how it just kind of opens up. There's no it just opens up with him going to visit a grave, and it's like it's very it's kind of crazy how it comes out of nowhere. Like you see the guy kind of, you don't, as an audience member, I can only imagine what it's like sitting there watching this for the first time. You see these people at a graveyard paying respects, and all of a sudden they see this guy in the distance, and he's getting closer, and all of a sudden like shit just pops off. And I always forget this about this the George Romero Night of the Living Dead is that the zombies weren't like they were a little bit more thoughtful, I guess is the word. Like
Mhm.
it seems like there's some thinking going on a little, or maybe it's just like instinct going on. They're just not completely mindless.
The first zombie that we ever see kind of acts in a way that almost very few zombies act afterwards. He's picking up a brick, he's smashing it into the window. They filmed this opening scene last. The graveyard zombie, he had already filmed the whole movie. He's walking around as a zombie the whole time. And the whole time their instructions were, you are weak. Zombies are weak, and the only way that they can kill people is in numbers. So then it came time, they're like, okay, zombie, graveyard zombie, kill Johnny. And he's like, I thought I was weak. And I guess Romero just thought for a second, he says, fuck it, just kill him. That's the quote. So yeah, I think they're not super consistent with it, because then later on at the end of the movie, we've got the daughter in the basement. She's using a knife or whatever that garden tool is that she's stabbing her mom with, which is absolutely fucking brutal. But I will say, yeah, the opening scene, you guys both said it. It sucks me in a surprising way. There's a lot of times, if I'm being 100% honest, with movies of this era, or even before this, especially, where I kind of have to force myself to get into them. They're not that good at drawing you in, but there is something about this that just sucks you in. And the way that it just goes from there, she's off and running. She gets in the car. Another fun fact, they crash the car. That was somebody on set is like their mom's car or something. They crashed that car. So that's why you see it. They ended up just running it into that tree or that telephone pole. Then it's all messed up afterwards. And that was like, oh, let's show the car being messed up. But she runs to the house. She finds this dead body upstairs, and she's just wandering around. She's like all catatonic at this point, and Ben shows up. This ends up being our lead guy. And to me, Robbie, you said truthfully that if it wasn't named Night of the Living Dead, we probably wouldn't be talking about it. And I'm curious, if they had not casted a black man in the lead, would we be talking about it? Would it have made anywhere near the social impact that it did? It brought us zombies. There's no denying that, but it's elevated so much by what George Romero says is not an accident, but an unintentional casting. They weren't looking for a black man. It was written as a white truck driver. He was supposed to be like a ruffian, kind of a tough guy. So, which is why this is really interesting. When he smacks Barbara, remember at the point when Barbara is like completely going crazy, we've got to go find Johnny. We've got to find Johnny. And she's trying to get out of there, and he smacks her. That's, to me, there's one. You're like, oh my God, she is overacting so much. Why did they write this woman to be so crazy? And the reason was it didn't fit Ben's personality for him to smack Barbara. It would have fit in the trucker's personality. That's why they had it written in there. But they're like, all right, we've got to have her get all worked up and be extra annoying so that people will buy that Ben will smack her. I just thought that was interesting when I heard it. But other than that, they say they didn't change anything. And that's kind of what makes it work, I think, as well as it does. They don't write him in as a black character. He's just a dude, and it makes all the social situations that come up after this all the more interesting for it. But Robbie, what do you think about the human drama that goes down in the house in the second act?
Well, I love the second act, and I get what you're saying. As unintentional as it was, when you make a movie, subtext happens, and the subtext of a black man taking charge, smacking a white woman, fucking throwing a gun in the face of a white dude saying, I'm boss up here, you can be boss down there, but up here, I'm boss up here. That has a connotation. Right. That was not the intention in the script. And it's not just that they cast a black man in that role. It's that they cast Duane Jones in that role. Like, that dude, he's the reason why this movie works.
Right.
That specific actor, Duane Jones, he's the reason why this movie works. He's the best performer in the movie. He's one of the only true, real actors in this film. A lot of other people are producers, writers, friends of George Romero, right? Like these are like, this is the George Romero made me feel like I can make movies with my friends.
Exactly.
I couldn't, but I can make YouTube videos with my friends. So that's cool. But it's Duane Jones's performance is so freaking powerful. And that subtext is there, as unintentional as it is, but it wouldn't have been read into so heavily without that brilliant performance from Duane Jones. And the reason why they cast him was because he's just the right dude. And props to Romero and company for not fucking around with it. Being like, we're going to cast the best dude. It happens to be a black dude. Now, in the commentary, or one of the commentaries on the Criterion Blu-ray, which is from the 90s DVD, they say they didn't change anything, but Duane said, let's slow up some of the tough talk because I don't want this to lean into stereotype.
Right.
So they did change certain things because, like you said, he was written to be a trucker. And so he was kind of gruff and he would say things to people. And he was like, but he didn't want black men to be represented that way. And George Romero's like, all right, I dig. Let's do it. And George Romero's always been that very progressive social kind of guy without being too in your face about it. And a lot of people could read into this movie as being in your face, especially in 1968. What's going on? We're talking about the year Martin Luther King was assassinated, when Robert Kennedy was assassinated. 1968 is one of the most turbulent times in American history, especially racially. And that was not the intention of this film. And it was just a right dude and a right actor doing the right thing at the fucking right time, man.
He does. You're right. George Romero always downplays the casting of Duane Jones. And I believe it to a degree, but I don't believe that he didn't realize the second that he made that decision, the impact that was going to have on the movie. I don't believe
how
that.
humble he is, right? Because, like, for instance, like he gets lauded for his statement on consumerism in Dawn of the Dead, right? Which is, malls were brand new at this time. We're not in the 80s or the 90s. He has no reason to really dig the idea that people are going to be so drawn to these things. Dude, that statement on consumerism is in the beginning of this film. You know what I'm saying? When they're talking about, when Johnny's talking about how many times we bought the same damn funeral arrangement, right? Like, that statement's even there. He wouldn't take credit for that. That's just how Romero was. And I think of him, he's like the Jack Kirby of horror comics, right? When you have other people taking credit and you're just trying to be humble and do the job, you get forgotten about sometimes.
Right. No, I agree, man. It's fucking wild. And it really does. Like, it makes this movie, and especially this second act where all this goes down, so much more interesting. And it's just, you can pick apart every little thing that goes down. Every decision that's made, every argument that they have is more interesting because,
dude, just watching people nail shit to fucking windows has never been more entertaining. Ever.
Right.
That's like half this movie.
Right. And, well, you know, Steph, obviously I want you to talk on everything else that we were just talking about, but I do want to start there with you. Does it get slow? Like, because that's one complaint I hear about this movie is the pacing in the second act. And there is about 10 minutes where it becomes a procedural thing where it's just like, okay, how does this dude make a torch out of a table? Take apart the table. How do you board up the house? But to me, it stays interesting. There's some seconds where it's like, it is getting a little bit slow, but overall it works pretty well for me. What about you?
No, I think the second pace works fine. For me, it's just, he showed throughout the film that he was a very capable guy, so it just those scenes where he's like, I heard him talking to the guys earlier when they came up from the basement, but how he was reinforcing the house and whatnot. So to see him like being in action, on his MacGyver shit was kind of cool. It kind of like gave him more backstory. It's like, oh, hey, this guy, he's not just all talk, like I'm seeing it in play. But I can see how it might be a little slow for some people, but for me, it worked. I was invested in, like Robbie said, this whole movie is based off this guy's performance. So I just wanted to see what was going to happen to this guy till the end, regardless of what was going on in the film. So it didn't slow up for me. I think it worked with what they were trying to do, give him some backstory without saying too much, But I think it was fine, to be honest.
Speaking of his backstory, have you ever heard, like at the beginning of Dawn of the Dead, where actually, let me explain it this. Duane Jones's big long speech that he gives about what happened to him before here. There was a gas truck going and these things are crawling all over it. It went through an intersection, a gas station blew up. Have you ever noticed, or have you ever heard this, or you ever seen at the beginning of the 2004 Dawn of the Dead, after the crazy opening, they got this like helicopter shot. You see that happen in it.
Yep.
To me, that's just like such a cool little touch.
That's why I've loved Zack Snyder ever since.
Right. But also
There-
just
and
go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say that there was a little moment that it's like I noticed that in 28 Days Later, there's a scene where Selena, they're just rescuing Cillian Murphy's character, and Selena and the other guy she's with, he's like explaining the initial outbreak and how chaotic it was, and I haven't seen Night of the Living Dead in so long, but just to see that scene, I was like, oh, that was Danny Boyle was homaging Night of the Living Dead all throughout 28 Days Later, so it's cool to see and connect those dots, and how many movies, like you said, have had little shout outs to specific that in particular that describing scene, and it was cool. It was cool.
I'll bet you like there's probably not a zombie movie that's ever been made, or there's not a good zombie movie that's ever been made that doesn't at least nod at this movie once or twice throughout the course of it, or at some George Romero made zombie movie.
And 28 Days Later nods to all of the first three. Right, because you got the zombie on a chain that's like Bub. You got the scene in the grocery store, and then you got all the Night of the Living Dead stuff, right? Link, I want to know like what do you feel about Duane Jones? And obviously this movie gets lauded as like a representation of like the blacks, the black experience in like 2000 or in 1968 or something like that.
Yeah, I think it rings true, like especially towards the end, the man was the hero and he just has an unceremonious ending. And just like the photo frames they're taking of how they're like dragging his body out and just like the meat hooks, it was I don't know, not emotional, but something that made me feel some type of way, just because it kind of made me think of like stuff that was happening to black people at the time, around those times. That's kind of almost like the most striking thing for me is the end shots of the photographs of them just, no respect for our hero. He did, the only thing he did was try to save everybody the entire time.
Right.
And no good comes of that. But yeah, it definitely, I feel like it was, even if it was unintentional, it was speaking on a lot of what was going on between race relations at the time, and people not, it's a cliche thing to say, but because he's black, they automatically didn't trust him, or the older guy didn't, he just like, oh, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And a lot of that was going on back then. So I think it was definitely speaking on an experience people were encountering at the time.
Another thing that I like about him, and this kind of goes for all the characters, is he's not perfect though. Like, I mean, the one huge mistake, if they had listened to Harry, the bald guy that somehow has a super hot wife, they would have lived. They would have went down to the basement. Right. They would have boarded themselves up. No zombies would have got in. The posse would have came through and they would have saved the day. At the same time, when he's like, we got to get the fuck out of here. The TV told us to get out of here, which I want to get into in a second. All the TV and radio spots. It's his idea. Like, okay, we got to get the gas. We got to get in this truck. And 2 people do die. And it's like, I love that about it. Like they don't make him perfect. It humanizes him. It humanizes everybody. And it makes it just, again, more interesting. And it makes the movie feel more real to me and him more real as a character. But let's get into that, dude. Like, to me, I think my favorite, some of the most entertaining bits of the whole movie, anytime the TV is on, all the radio announcements, and you're hearing you're picking up information at different times. You're learning information through the characters, but then you're learning different information that doesn't always even jive with the information you're seeing in front of you. Like, they're calling them assassins on the radio and stuff, like these assassins out there committing mass murder. It's like, it's not the way I'm viewing the situation. But Robbie, what do you think of the use of TV and radio in the movie?
Well, first of all, I need to definitely have a Night of the Living Dead version of another perspective of the John Wick franchise, where like that is the news report. Like, these assassins are all over fucking Paris, New York, just fucking come out of nowhere. Like, whatever. That's some wild shit. It's one of the things that adds to the realism of this movie and the prophetic nature of George A. Romero's work. Like, what I instantaneously think of when I watch this film is what it felt like. First of all, I live in the South. I live in Alabama. So there's a lot of like tornado stuff that goes on down here, right? We've had some really gnarly tornado outbreaks down here. And when those moments happen, when the weather gets very severe, we're glued to that television. We're glued to that radio trying to figure out what's the information. What do I need to know? Do I need to go to a shelter? Is it on the way? Like, so that's something there. However, also start thinking about this. 9/11. When 9/11 happened, glued to the TV screen with the ticker on the bottom, like, what is the information? What's going on? Are there assassins unleashed upon a fucking America? You know, like, but
or
it's
COVID.
COVID the same fucking way. Like, Romero understood the media's reaction to these things in a day where it was mostly about information. Notice in the next movie, he takes that same idea with the media and he extrapolates it out, right? And he starts there, and then he gets to even more about what media is today with the everything's got to be a debate, a polarizing topic that we're debating. Are they zombies? Should we treat them this way? No, we shouldn't. You're out of your mind. That's not in this movie, but like what the natural progression of the media from this one into Dawn of the Dead, that's what makes this one stand out even more to me, because this is when it's still factual, and then when it becomes too real, we decide to split sides on it and like make everybody focus on things that are not actually about the issue. And all of Romero's zombie films are about people focusing on stuff that is not the issue.
Right.
In Night of the Living Dead, they're focusing on whether they should say up or down. It doesn't fucking matter. They should work together. Right? Dawn of the Dead. Doesn't matter that they go to the mall. They need to work together. They need to not act tribalist. Right? The motorcycle gang comes in. Let him fucking through. Flyboy fucks that up for all of them. Right? Day of the Dead. Who gives a shit about why it's happening? Work together. Make humanity thrive. Land of the Dead. They literally put a fence around the zombie thing and all the rich people think they're good. No, you're not. Because John Leguizamo's crazy and he's coming after your ass. But, you know, that's what I like about that. But it adds a realism to it. Think about the impact that Frank Miller's Dark Knight Returns had and the way it used media footage to give exposition, but also to ground it in a sense of realism around a community. And that's what that does for me in this film.
Right. Hell yeah. What about you, Steph? The radio and TV spots, brother.
Yeah, I gotta agree with you. When I saw this, maybe it's because it's so recent, I immediately thought of like COVID and the misinformation that's easily spread by the media and how they're constantly changing the information that's being sent out there. You don't know what to believe sometimes. And that's one thing I noticed again about this film. Upon this rewatch, I didn't notice previous times, was that this was only happening in certain parts of the country. Like other parts of the country were completely fine. Another 28 days later, homage, they didn't. Another thing, 28 days later, homage. But the fact that the government, you know, this is you know, in the South, you got to assume there's more open area, so I feel like it would be easier to kind of like weed out these infected who would be kind of wandering aimlessly about. But yeah, I mean, their response time wasn't terrible, but it just kind of reminded me of like COVID and how it was sometimes the government can be a bunch of people or a bunch of chickens with their heads cut off, just
and even the
running
media,
around. You know?
Yeah, and even the media involvement stuff, like thinking about Dawn of the Dead, there's that moment where the producer, the news station's like, you keep those stations, those rescue stations open, but they're like, but those are compromised, like they've been overrun. It doesn't matter. Like we take them off, people aren't going to watch. That's what you care about, right? Like, dude, you're absolutely right on the nose with that.
In so many ways, like COVID really did illustrate a lot of the ideas that Romero talked about. I used to say all the time, like, you know what society needs? I said it ignorantly. We need something catastrophic happen that's going to all make us realize what's important, get our priorities straight, and make us come together. And then COVID happened. I'm like, well, we definitely don't need that. We're not going to come together. That is not like chaos and catastrophe is not going to be the answer that's going to bring us together as a fucking society. But the thing that it makes me think of, if you're living in 1968, you're seeing Vietnam every day on the war. You're seeing black and white footage of people roaming the countryside with guns and flamethrowers, wiping people out, throwing bodies on fires.
And that's the first time American society saw that in real time.
Right.
Like not after the fact. Yeah.
So That to me is like, that's to George Romero, that was his political statement. He was talking more about Vietnam than he was talking about the race relationships in America at the time, or really anything else. But it's also, it just has some of the best moments too. The guy that's leading the gang, he's got all the best lines.
Are they slow moving, Chief?
Yeah, they're dead. They're all messed up.
Dude, that's a great line, dude.
He's not an actor.
That's Chili Billy, who's the news guy, who is the father of the main character in Day of the Dead.
Oh, no shit. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
No, that's cool.
Yeah, he was a horror host in Pittsburgh. Chili Billy. Billy's like theater. Like Keith David talks about him in The In Search of Darkness.
I guess while we're on this, the TV and the radio bits, what do you think? Do you guys believe that it's the Venus probe? Pretty much the news is explaining to us there was this Venus probe. It went by Venus. It got some radiation from there. And when it came back, that radiation is now what's causing the zombie outbreak. And I don't know much. I haven't looked into much about what people say or what people think. Or I heard Romero say, like, kind of like, yeah, people really clung on to that Venus probe thing, and everybody thinks that that's the reason for the zombie outbreak. I'm like, well, motherfucker, that you pretty much said it was. Like that's the way I read it in the movie, that is the explanation. What do you think, Robbie?
Well, that is the explanation in the movie, but maybe George Romero is trying to be cheeky with the idea, like what Steph was alluding to, is that the media doesn't know what the fuck is going on, and they're just trying to put together whatever they can. That's like, just, cause doesn't always necessarily equal effect. Right. There may have been a Venus probe that had a lot of things. Maybe it's because there's no room left in hell. Maybe it's because we got too big for our britches, as we're told in Day of the Dead. It could be there's a different reason in every Romero film, and when you put it all together, that's where you realize it doesn't matter how it started. The important thing is that we won't fucking work together to solve it.
Well said. Barbara, the way that Barbara is portrayed in this movie, the way that they have her act, a lot of people took offense to that. Like, why are you making this female so hysterical and so useless in the movie? The way that he treats female characters in the next two movies, do you feel like he's making up for Barbara? There's like an evolution of, you see like the woman's movement progress through his movies up until Day of the Dead, where you have a female badass lead that nobody ever talks about. Nobody ever puts her on the Ripley list of all the most badass women, but she belongs on that list for sure. What do you think he does with his next two movies and this one, as far as like the female characters are concerned?
I don't think he's making up for it. I think George tries to portray realistic characters, right? And in Night of the Living Dead, they're like, what can we do? We can do a horror film. That's easy. So they're playing with tropes. But I would argue there is a very strong woman in this film, and it's the wife of Harry.
Judy, yeah, I agree.
Judy, who like has no problem telling Harry, "You are a fucking coward piece of shit, bro." Like what the fuck, right? But I don't think he's doing that intentionally. I think he's doing it because I think he sees women that act like that.
Right.
I think he sees women and men act like that, and I think he sees women and men act like Barbara in this film. And when one of these things, I'll be honest with you, when this shit goes down, we all want to be Ben. Most of us are Barbara, and the other rest of us are Harry. So, like, I'm just gonna say,
or Tom, the other guy that's just gonna do with whatever everybody else is telling him to do.
You want me to go to the truck? I'll go to the fucking truck. You want me to come upstairs? I'll come upstairs. What do you want me to do? Just tell me, goddammit. Just tell me what to do.
To your point, Verno, about people thinking that he didn't do her justice, it's like, should she have been the one who got killed at the very beginning? And that would have insinuated she was too weak to fend for herself. But with her role, it could have been a guy. She was just a emotionally broken, distraught character based on shit that it could have been a dude acting the same way, like Robbie said. I don't think it was based on gender or anything like that, but it was just a character going through that emotional arc. It wasn't regulated to, I'll just leave it at that. She was, it could have been anybody acting like that.
No, I agree. And Robbie, I'm glad that you said that about Judy, who I think is Harry's wife. She's a very strong character. Exactly. If he thought of women as being weak and hysterical in moments of crisis, he would have had all three women in the house be like that. She was the only one. I think the other girl, she doesn't get much of a personality one way or the other. But, and I think this is kind of speaking just about the era that it was in 68, and then is Dawn 78 or is it 79? 78?
78. 77?
77. Yeah, I think you're right. 77. If you were to put in those situations, the men, especially in 68, they probably would be the one making the decisions. That's just how society was. It might even be like that now, depending on the men and depending on the women. If me and my wife fucking some shit goes down, she's gonna be making the decisions. But that's not fucking for every household, like for sure. So I think it's a sign of the times. But yeah, let's talk about the best bit of the movie. We've been talking this whole time. We haven't talked about the zombies at all. So pretty much they've been on the periphery this whole entire movie. We had a bit where Duane went out there and bitch slapped a few of them, tire ironed a few of those motherfuckers. But at the end of the movie is when we get them trying to get some gas in the truck. We've got some people killed out there. We got the truck explode. Duane making his way back in with the torch with all the zombies surrounding him. Then they come into the house, and long story short, everybody ends up dead besides Duane Jones, who plays Ben at the end of the movie. So aside from the very end, which we'll touch on, we'll get into further after this. Robbie, what do you think of the third act and all the zombies? And first thing, is this movie scary in 2023?
Yes.
Still scary.
Yes, it's still incredibly scary. I mean, like we may not know what it feels like to be shot in the head. We may not know what it feels like to be burned alive. But a lot of the most popular horror films or slasher films, we know what it's like to be cut, right? We also know what it's like to be in your house and somebody's knocking on the door and you don't want them to know you're there. So you're kind of like fucking hiding. Now imagine if there's like 20 of those motherfuckers pushing through the fucking doors and shit, right? Like it's a very like confined sense of paranoia that we're given in this film. And I think it still works, right? And that third act is so great because anybody who criticizes the second act for being too slow, well, the movie as a whole is not, because that third act goes like that.
Yeah.
As soon as they decide to go and take the truck out, and the end of the second act is when the truck explodes. And then from that point forward, it's Ben beating the shit out of Harry and then shit going really wrong very quickly. Like from that moment, it just all goes bad. There's not a moment of reflection. There's not a moment where we slow it down at the beginning of the third act. It gets right to it and it wraps its shit up, right? The zombies are great. And they are the epitome of what zombies are supposed to be, right? And like Romero, like everybody tells the story that Romero goes out there and tells everybody, zombies kind of act like this.
Right. Right.
Do your own thing, but like give your zombie a personality. That's prevalent here in this first movie. Like you see it in Dawn, you see it in Day where there's a clown zombie. You see it in Dawn where there's a football player zombie or some shit like that, right? There's a nun, but like everybody's given their own personality, right, to each zombie. Like there's a different kind of take on everybody that's very individualistic that makes it seem to work, because not everybody's just doing the Frankenstein fucking shit, you know?
Right.
Everybody's doing something different, but it's all still united by the direction of George Romero. And then, like, look at the gore in that third act. We talk about how gory Dawn of the Dead and especially Day of the Dead is. Day of the Dead is gnarly with the gore, like actual intestines being eaten. No, Romero was doing that shit in 1968 with Night of the Living Dead. These are people that are taking bites out of like pig intestines and shit. And I can't even imagine in 1968 where you think Psycho is one of the most transgressive films you've ever seen, and then you go to the drive-in and watch this. It's got to blow your mind. If you've never seen Italian cinema, it's got to blow your mind in 1968, man. Like 100%. This a Hammer film, it ain't. You know what I'm saying? This is not a gothic Christopher Lee romantic Dracula. This is like people eating body parts, and you're seeing it. And even just that, going back to the very beginning of the film, when Barbara first sees that face of the corpse upstairs, that's pretty fucking crazy for its time.
In America in 1968, that right there is probably one of the goriest things that anyone's ever seen. And then when it gets to the zombies eating human flesh, find me something more shocking up until that point.
I love when he busts in the door when he's coming back from the truck blowing up, and like Harry started to keep him out. He kind of he busts down the door, camera cuts to his face. He just gives him a quick glare, you motherfucker. And and then it was just a cool little moment, but he goes back to being a badass and stuff, and then has to beat Harry's ass, you know, and it was
He
yeah. That was
when
fun.
he shoots
Oh,
Harry, he looks so fucking cool. Like I'll never look
yeah.
that cool my whole entire life. I promise. He looks so dope.
And it was a scene where the kid with the girlfriend where they get blown up in the truck. When
Mhm.
him and the main dude are trying to reinforce the zombies first grab the main guy. What is his name? I'm
Ben.
so I don't call him
Ben.
the main dude. Ben. When they grab Ben at the very beginning, and you know, I was just trying to take that into the context of what, like you said, seeing this in 1968, like you can only imagine you seen a hand grab through a window and this dude's just cutting, because most people's reaction when you get cut is like, you know, but this person's, their fingers just getting cut off and they're still reaching. Like, it was simple, but it still holds weight. Like, it still kind of wowed me, you know, especially looking back in like 1968, seeing that for the first time, and just some cool moments that still hold up really, really well.
Well, it's exactly what Robbie was talking about. Like you could anything that happens with your fingers, your teeth, your eye. There's something about that. You're like, because these are the things getting hurt the most and getting cut the most. If we're used to anything getting cut, it's our hands. So to see him just like if they would have squirted some blood out right there, it would have sent it over the top. But even there's something about there not being any blood that makes like, oh, he's so dried up. There's not even blood in him anymore. Like that's disgusting. Even the guys he looks at Ben like, what the fuck is going on?
No shit. He's like,
you
this
see
is
that?
wild, bruh. It's like ice cream cake. What the fuck is this?
The way that they shoot it, we're basically what they're doing, other than the moments where they're like swarming in the house, where we've got them coming in, we have Johnny putting his gloved hand on the door, and they just take Barbara. Like the swarming bits, when they're outside of the house, when you're just seeing them eating the two that got blown up in the car, that they're basically just like still shot, person eating, still shot, person eating, but it's like it's so goddamn effective and so creepy and so gory, and the music that they're playing during these moments, this is when it's getting very like abstract. As Robbie was saying, this is all pre-made free audio library music, and he took the majority of this soundtrack from like sci-fi sections of the audio library. And these are some weird, like abstract sounds that he's putting in the movies that, again, you don't see that in movies before this. I don't think so, at least.
Well, you're getting like that theremin kind of vibe to it, right? Which you don't see the sci-fi compositions apply to horror.
Right.
And it works so well. And that's why like the Venus probe and all that shit. But dude, it like the movie starts like any Universal monster movie with the music, you know, it's like, and it works. And it's really cool because it harkens back to a classic type of horror monster film that had been getting away from at this point, right? We had moved away from it because the atomic age kind of, you know, we kind of became gluttonous with the atomic age, and we had all the giant ant films and all the alien films, all the Cold War nuclear era kind of stuff. And he brings that connotation back into it, but with that realism. And then in that final act, dude, when that music slowly starts getting more just tonal and just like ethereal, bruh.
Right.
It's gorgeous.
It's so great. Like when the music peaks too, when it gets to its most intense points, you know, when he's running into the basement, it's just like you said, it is dated feeling, even in 1968. That's one thing. Like this movie is like a stepping stone from the past to the more modern stuff. You got this old school music, you're starting in a graveyard, you're in black and white, but then you've got this more modern setting. You've got people watching the TV, talking about more modern issues for the time.
Yeah.
This was really like the branch out from the old Gothic to the modern era.
Dude, it really was, because like you gotta think, just 15 years previous to this, they're re-releasing all the Universal classics in theater. And a lot of people are watching them, like George A. Romero. Right? And he's doing that kind of a movie, but way different. It's kind of like what Martin Scorsese was trying to do with New York, where he was trying to take like a film musical aesthetic from like the 40s and 50s and apply it to realism and crime in the 70s in a New York setting. It's very similar to that, man. Like I can't imagine what a comparable thing would be today, because we're just so, I guess, I don't know. I don't know. I don't know if there would be a comparable thing. Like, I don't know if there's a style of film like in the 2000s or the 90s that like would like that you could appropriate, but do it in a more gnarly, visceral fashion. Maybe Eli Roth's Thanksgiving was trying to do that, but it's not as impactful
Right.
as this or something else.
Right. No, I agree, man. Yeah, so let's talk about the end of the film. To me, this is the thing, man. We've already touched on it a little bit. I guess we've said a lot of things that make this film a film that we're still talking about 50 years later. And I guess that's what it takes. It takes 2 or 3 things to make it as important as it is. The end of this film is so goddamn impactful and so sad. And the fact that it's still like, just like what you're saying, I'm seeing those images, and it's not like we're seeing images like that on the news of Black people today,
Right.
but it represents an idea of like, they're not treating that body as if it was a human body. They're not treating them like they're humans. And there's this dehumanizing that happens to pretty much anybody in America that isn't white. And that makes the whole thing still just fucking relevant as hell.
All right, Vince, hit him in the head, right between the eyes. Good shot. Okay, he's dead. Let's go get him. That's another one for the fire.
This bleak ending, you'll see this in almost every zombie movie that comes after it. This is the bleakest of all subgenres. I don't know if there's fucking very many happy endings in this entire subgenre, and it all starts here. So what do you think, Robbie?
Well, there's the obvious racial connotation where it harkens back to like lynchings and burnings and shit like that, right? Now, if this was in the original script before they cast Duane, right? It's about how, and a lot of these movies are about this without the racial connotation, is how inhuman we can be with dealing with this threat, with where we almost forget that the zombies are us, right? Because we just see them as other. We see them as them, us versus them. And it seems like Romero's really focused on that, whether it's through racism, whether it's through classism, whether it's through sexism, whether it's through anything, right? Like anything that makes you feel like someone is other than you shows it will eventually lead to a point where you can inhumanely treat them, because villainizing someone removes a little bit of their humanity to you in your head. And that's why they go out of their way to show those hooks. This is how we deal with meat, right? This is how we deal in the slaughterhouse with pigs and cows. We have these big hooks and we just kunk. And he's just showing when human bodies can be rent asunder and treated like meat, we have truly lost the cause, right? We are truly a lost cause as a species. So even though they think that they're about to wrap this shit up, we're about to find out 10 years later, no, you don't. Dawn of the Dead's still happening. But like
we got everything under control here. I love that too. There's like this overconfidence in them. Yeah, we got it all taken care of. No big deal.
Yeah, but and to them, it's no big deal. It's no big deal for these dudes within a day to go and just shoot people in the fucking head, hook them up with meat hooks, and just put them on a fucking pile and burn them. That's fucked up.
Right,
We've lost our humanity way before this shit.
Well, it's freaky how quickly it becomes, even in the viewer's mind. Like, you just don't think of zombies as humans. You'll watch get mowed down, and it just doesn't impact you. It reminds me of like I've heard hunters say, like the second that they'll go out there, they have all the respect in the world for that animal. They see it, it's majestic, it's beautiful. They kill it, and it's food instantly. They start cutting it up, and they're not sitting there feeling sorry for it anymore. It's just food. And we do a similar thing like that with zombies. We quickly, they're not human, and we just make that human form not human.
And it's nice to have that exclamation point at the end to remind us. It's kind of like what Wes Craven did in Last House on the Left, which is a movie I talk about a lot, where the whole movie we're like, fuck yeah, get revenge on these rapist bastards. But then by the end of the film, we're like, fuck, you guys went a little bit too far maybe with that. Like, holy shit, who are we when we dismiss the humanity of any other soul, right?
Right. Hell yeah,
animal or human.
What about you, Missing Link? What's your thoughts on the bleak ending? I know you touched on it a little bit, but
no, I enjoy. I think it's fitting. Probably this is a deep reach, but ties into it's kind of like doing the right thing just to do the right thing, you know, being the unsung hero, right? I think you said earlier, Robbie, when you're doing the right thing, kind of sometimes you get overlooked, and it's like that kind of ties into his death. You know, he did the right thing, and you know, there was no promise he was going to be rewarded for it at the end, or he was going to be safe. He was just doing the right thing to do the right thing. And sometimes you're not, you know, you don't always get the rewards being the hero, and it's you just got to do the right thing because it's the right thing to do, you know.
Right.
And I think that was a little deep reach with his character arc, but I kind of appreciated that. But
right, well,
yeah,
see,
I know
like
that ending
it's
is
another thing that makes it more real, right? Because we don't have character arcs. We can do good, we can do right, and then you're gonna get fucking burnt anyway. I like when movies don't go with the predictable character arc that all movies do, because
right.
it's usually not real. It's not how shit goes down.
No, not at all. And that's kind. I mean, that's kind of why I didn't mind the slower moments in the second half, because it's like there are slow moments in life, you know.
Right,
to
right.
get to the exciting parts, there's a lot of work in between. But I just want to say real quick on the ending. I spoke on earlier. It's just like you said, Verno. It ties into, and right, Robbie, you said as well. It has the racial connotations going on. And it's just the imagery is very striking. Like you said, he was a hero, and at the end of the movie, he's just treated like a piece of meat, piece of garbage, like the rest of the zombies. And it was just kind of speaking on how quickly, like you said, we can dehumanize something or just put a mask on. It's like, you know, it's not a living being anymore. You know, it's still very poignant for today.
Yeah.
I hate to say it, you guys have me thinking this is something. I was just fucking talking to Stu about this. I'm really quick a lot of times, like, oh, somebody did me wrong, I'll fucking write them off. And it's the same mechanism that is in our brain where we can just like switch something. Like, oh, not human, click,
Right.
Zombie, kill him. We don't care anymore. And that's something I struggle with, and I'm like trying to get over. Quit being like, oh, this person did this, so I don't fucking like them, or they are that. No, they just did that, and I probably fucking do that shit too. So I hope they don't write me off when I do it. So I don't know. It's just get a little personal there, but you can apply this shit to so many things in real life that I love it.
Yeah, another thing you were talking about, like Romero's like heavy. Romero and Russo are very heavy into the Vietnam analogy, right? 1968, we're in Vietnam. We don't quite realize how it's going to work out, but we can see, a lot of people can see the writing on the wall, right? And what Steph was saying about Ben kind of being the hero, trying to do the right thing, but it still doesn't work out. Right. And then you have the idea of like, there were people that were saying we shouldn't be there. We shouldn't even be helping this other country or this or that. It's all about this. And we can look at it in a historical context and be like, oh, well, Nixon was just worried about, this or that, or like Johnson was just worried about this or that. But like, ultimately, sometimes you try to do the right thing, but it's not always going to work out. Right. Mm-hmm. And it leads to this idea in the movie where Harry's like, what, you think we're supposed to stick our necks out because someone might need help? And Ben's like, yeah, that's kind of the idea.
Right. Right.
And Ben's in the right.
Right.
But it doesn't mean that Ben gets a happy ending. Right. And yeah, so that's, and unfortunately that's the human experience, man.
Right. Hell yeah, man. Well said, both of you guys. All right. Well, we have reached the point where let's grade this thing. I want to grade this thing, and then there's something I plan to do with all these episodes during Zombie Fest where I'm going to attempt to kind of bridge the gap between this movie and the next movie that we're going to watch after this. That's going to happen in 1979. So with that in mind, Rockin Robbie Billups, Night of the Living Dead. I can only imagine the kind of grade you're going to give this movie. What are you giving it?
A+++, 0.69. Boom. That's what I'm going to give this movie, because I can't think like, so werewolves. Kurt Ziamad, whatever, the dude who wrote The Wolfman, he took a bunch of ideas and formulated the Hollywood myth of the werewolf, which persists today. Mm-hmm. But he didn't create the idea of the werewolf. George A. Romero and John Russo created the idea of the fucking zombie. Like the living dead, flesh-eating zombie. I can't think of another time where an entire new monster was created by a filmmaker. Cannot think of it. And I guarantee you that anybody in film today wishes they could have the impact that George A. Romero has. Luckily for them, they made more money than George A. Romero made in his career. But yeah, it's a perfect film. It's so good. There's a reason that this got released on Criterion. It fucking rocks.
Right.
A+++, 0.69.
Hell yeah. Well, let me just say, dude, if you are into this movie and you don't own that Criterion edition, it's phenomenal. The special features are great. The
transfer.
The commentaries could be a little bit better. You've got the one commentary where you've got George Romero and John Russo, and John Russo just wants to talk the whole time. He's the guy that co-wrote the movie and kind of co-wrote what became the inspiration for Return of the Living Dead. He didn't really fucking write that movie, but I wish there was more George Romero in that commentary.
Well, that was recorded in 1994, that commentary, and that's when they didn't really know what commentaries were supposed to be.
Right.
And so commentaries back from movies in the 90s, they're all just like people hanging out.
Yeah.
And sometimes it works, like the Kevin Smith commentaries for like Clerks and Mallrats and Chasing Amy. But this one, they don't really get too deep into the film. They're all like, oh no, don't you remember that tornado came through? And
yeah,
blah,
it's
blah, blah,
interesting.
blah.
It's cool. If you're a big fan of the film, you're going to enjoy it. But you're right. It could be better. My favorite commentaries is when there's a film historian guiding the conversation and asking questions and making it all work. But Link, what do you think, man? What's your grade for Night of the Living Dead?
I'm going to give this an A, man. A film that's, like I said, upon this rewatch, I've seen how much it reverberates throughout not just horror film history, but just film as a whole. And still how there's messages, the themes behind it that still resonate to this very day. You got to give it credit. And like Robbie said, he created zombie. I mean, some people, it's a little oversaturated now, but just I love zombies. I got to thank George Romero for that. That love for zombies. So this is one of the most important films of all time. I gotta agree. It's just a great film. Holds up beautifully well. I give it a solid A.
Yeah, he didn't just create the zombie, but he created how you do zombie fiction.
Right.
Right? Yeah.
It's crazy. He created how you do it on the small scale. He created the post-apocalyptic zombie universe. He created the post-apocalyptic zombie universe, and to see how people have dealt with all the stuff that you're going to get in all the zombie movies and zombie TV shows. He already touched on like all of that. There's really not much new to do. There is the random, you get movies like Pontypool, which I highly recommend checking that out. It's on Shudder right now from 2009. There's a movie that I haven't heard or I haven't seen, but I hear it's quite different. Link, I bet you've seen it. The Girl with All the Gifts. Warm Bodies.
Yes.
There's movies that do different things, but almost every major zombie movie follows everything laid out by George Romero, especially in his first three movies, or his first three zombie movies. I'll give it an A+. It's my favorite movie. How do I word this? It's the oldest movie that I enjoy the most. There's only really, for me personally, I know, Robbie, you're quite different. I don't know where you stand on a lake, but there's not a whole shitload of movies that came out before this that I can really enjoy. Like, I can watch Bela Lugosi's Dracula and appreciate it for everything that it is, but I don't really enjoy it anywhere near as much as this. The only older movie that I can think of, there's two older movies. There's Psycho and there's Bride of Frankenstein. Those, for me personally, there's a lot that I haven't seen. I'm just talking for what I have seen. Other than that, man, there's not a lot that and the other one that I actually really wanted to mention was Rosemary's Baby, which came out the same year. Like, Night of the Living Dead is the big push forward into the modern era especially for the independent filmmaker. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe Rosemary's Baby is like a Hollywood production.
Yeah.
Roman Polanski, a big time movie director. There's movie stars in there. It's got all the budget. It's got all the credibility,
the pomp and circumstance.
That what he said. But this one is it's so impactful. The independent filmmaker, the horror genre, the zombie genre, just everything that it's done. Fucking A+. So you guys out of the chat.
Quick, I'm sorry, real
No,
quick.
you're good.
Like, maybe one of the reasons why the movie was so impactful is the fact that they didn't do the copyright right, and anybody could play it at any time.
Right.
And it got introduced to so many people. So maybe everybody needs to put out their first movie for free. So there you go.
Exactly. All right. So this came out in 1968. Next week, we're going to be talking about Lucio Fulci's Zombie from 1979 and Return of the Living Dead from 1985. But basically, if I wanted to give out some recommendations for zombie movies between 1968 and between Zombie and 1979, and I will say there's The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. Never seen it. I'm lying. I watched a half hour of it. It wasn't that good. But if you're from Britain, you fucking love it. And that's all you talk about. You say it's great. Robbie,
That's for you, Mark. If you like beans and toast, you like that movie.
Yeah, exactly.
I've never seen it. No.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the few like zombie movies that happened between that era. This is why I'm kind of pointing it out. It's weird. Nobody took this idea and fucking ran with it. Nobody. Cronenberg made Shivers and Rabid. You can debate all day. Are those zombie movies? They're zombie adjacent. There's a zombie element to them. There's human beings en masse attacking people and spreading in an infectious way. They're kind of zombie movies to me. And then there's Dawn of the Dead, which a lot of people would say is the king of all zombie movies, one of the greatest horror movies.
Which Romero didn't even want to do. So it really comes down to Dario Argento being like, no, you need to make another one of these.
Right. And The Crazies, I guess, another Romero zombie adjacent film. You could kind of, it's zombie like. But Robbie, I was going to ask you, am I missing anything that you can think of? I don't fucking think
I can think of, bro. Not at all. But by the point Dawn of the Dead was made, zombies in the vernacular of popular culture. Right. So like this shows you the impact of this film, bro.
And that's what's kind of crazy. You would think like, oh, zombies, they got into the vernacular because everybody made a bunch of zombie movies. Not really. Like they weren't calling them Zombies and Shivers or Rabid. And I don't think most people in America had heard of, what is it called? Let Sleeping Corpses Lie is the American name for The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue. But it just goes to show this movie got picked up by the zeitgeist. They said it was a zombie movie and it just fucking blew up. And it's still like ridiculously impactful to this day. So next week, double feature, super excited about it. Lucio Fulci's Zombie and Return of the Living Dead. Rockin Robbie Billups, you've just wrapped up a holiday horror fest. You're going to be covering New Year's Evil, which actually came out a couple days before this one's dropping. So what do you got going on Pop Culture Philosophers?
Well, on January 8th, we return with PCP Movie Night, starting our 2024 season with the only way we can do it, with picking a movie franchise from our childhood that we loved, and we're going to ruin those memories. We're talking about all 7 Police Academy films, January 8th. Join me, Jelani Brooks, who I just gave $21 because he was like, I'm not going to be on the show. I'm not spending $3 per movie to rent. So I gave him $21 so that he could be there, and Fable and Joe Corallo. So watch us destroy our childhood. January 8th, Police Academy franchise.
I love it, man. You are a glutton for punishment, my friend. Hell yeah. Now, Steph, you and Stu just moved Supreme Clientele over to Tuesdays. So you want to tell people what you guys got going on?
We've taken a break, Christmas break the last couple of weeks, but we will be back. We'll be back Tuesday, so you'll probably see this after the Tuesday. We'll have an episode coming up, but every Tuesdays at 9 we go over some of our favorite books from the previous week. Usually it's like 3, sometimes it's 4, and then we just talk about our love of comics, and it's always a good time. Dr. Jim's Fan Club on YouTube.
I could not agree more, man. I say it all the time. I love you guys' conversations. I love when Fable joins, but I love even more when my man E joins, because it just takes shit to another level as only E could. So I appreciate all you guys, down in the chat. Again, let me know your thoughts on Night of the Living Dead, on George Romero in general, on zombies in general. And thank you so much. We will see you next time.